Hello everyone, welcome to my studio. A short video on application of watercolour. A lot of you like to take up watercolour, but unsure what to do and how to go about it. We don't always get time in the class to go into watercolour with too much depth. So this is to give you an idea what's involved and indeed what you can practice at home. So just a short video just to talk you through the basics. Watercolour is a great medium, but it's a very unforgiving medium for beginners. So therefore you've got to learn the application of watercolour. The biggest problem is people will overpaint. If you overpaint in watercolours, it can become quite muddy very quickly. So in a moment, I'm going to go to my overhead camera and talk you through the basic application of watercolour. The other crucial thing is when you're learning watercolour, keep it simple, or the subject matter, keep it very simple. Don't make it complicated. And if you keep it simple, then the main focus can go on the application of paint. And also when you're practicing, don't choose too many colours. I'll explain the colours I'm using in a few moments, but there's only 3 of them. Keep it very simple so that all the focus and the effort can go in the practice of brushstroke. Okay, so I'll just go to the overhead camera. Here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do, before I do that, let me just share the screen with you. So I'll come off that for a moment and just show you this subject. Here it is. As I said a moment ago, keep it very simple. A teapot and a teacup in saucer. Okay. And what we're going to do in a few moments, or what I'm going to do in a few moments, is to take this object, this subject, and turn it into something a bit more exciting using watercolor and hopefully achieve something like this. Okay, so here once again, as you can see, the brush strokes I've kept very loose, very spontaneous, which is very important in watercolor or indeed in painting generally. Just to explain what I would do, I'll work wet onto wet. There's 2 main techniques with watercolor, as you know, wet onto wet, wet onto dry. So I'll pre-wet the background very soon, apply the watercolor, and then I'll work wet onto dry when it comes to the actual teapot and the cup. Without further ado, I'll come off the screen share and back then to the head camera. So very quickly, I will draw up the subject, very loose drawing. I tend to go for the bowl of the teapot. There we go. First. There's the top. It doesn't have to be an accurate drawing, remember, because this is just exercise. There's the lid to the teapot, and then the handle. So there's the, and the spout, of course. There we go. There's the teapot. And then the cup. Let's put a cup, the ellipse. Bottom of the cup, and then of course there's the saucer. So a very simple drawing, and there's the handle. So the drawing is done. As I keep repeating, keep it basic. I've already got the mixes made up. There we go, in my palette. I'm using ultramarine blue and cerulean blue. I've also made a third mix of using, again, ultramarine blue, alizarin to give me a violet. And that's sufficient. Here's my water pot, 2 containers, 1 for clean water and 1 for cleaning the brushes. And I'm ready to go. I'm going to be using a wide brush here. This is a number 1, a 1-inch one, I should say. And I'm now going to pre-wet the background and also the foreground. The painting itself is on an angle. That's the benefit, because when I apply the paint, and you'll see this, then gravity will allow the paint to run down. If you don't want it to run down, then you put it flat. And I've also got the advantage of picking up the watercolor pad and also allowing the paint to flow around. More of that in a moment. There's a difference between saturating paper, in other words, putting plenty of water on, or merely dampening it. If you dampen it, then of course that gives you a bit more control because the paint won't flow quite as quick. And depending on what it is you want to achieve, you will use both, dampening it and saturating it. But at the moment, I'm just barely dampening it with that flow. I'll bring that down into the foreground. The other thing, of course, then is when you apply the paint. If the paper is still quite wet, then it runs more freely. If you wait too long, it goes dry. Then you've got to repeat the process. Always make sure, as I've done here, that the colors are already mixed, ready to go. I'll stick with this large brush. The next thing now is to be relaxed. My mantra is 1-2 strokes of the brush, move on. Okay, so I'm going to start with the ultramarine blue. 1, 2. There we go. Now the temptation straight away is to go back into paint and rebrush, but no, leave it. I'll just pick some more of the color. Done. Don't worry, it will sort itself out without you forcing it. So you can see how quickly I'm working here. No more than that's a couple of strokes of the brush. That dark area there, I'll leave it. I can add a bit more interest. So I've done the background. Yes, where the paint comes up to a dry area, it will stop. So when you wet paper, you apply the paint. As soon as it comes to a dry area, the paint will no longer flood. And if I need to, I can always pick off or mop up what we call beads of paint, you know, either with a tissue or with the end of a dry brush. There we go. It's done. Now I'm going to work wet onto dry. And just for a change of color, I'll come to the cerulean color. This time I'm going to use a round brush, but when I apply the paint in a moment, it won't be using the tip, it'll be using the side of the brush. Or the other alternative is to go for a wider brush. Okay. Go on, I'll make this easy choice. I go for a wider brush. Here's the paint. Another tip is don't just put the brush in and take the paint out. Always give it a stir. Every time you take the paint from your palette, give it a stir. The pigment will settle at the bottom of the pool. You won't get the darkest value. And if you're unsure, just do a little test. Okay, but just another word on doing a test. It can look quite strong when you first put it down, but with watercolor, it can dry off as much as 50% lighter. So wet onto dry. I'm following my instinct, and I'm also directing that brush as if I was painting the actual teapot itself. There we go. Pick up some more of the paint, give it a little stir into the spout. Done. Now I can use the edge of the brush and just done. Now I come to the cup. What I didn't point out to you is the light on this one is coming from the left. I'm imagining the light coming from the left. That's the inside of the lips of the teacup. So the light would be catching the right-hand side, but the shadow would be there on the ground. Here we go. And there's the saucer. And I might keep the actual left-hand side of the saucer, the bare paper, same with the cup. So I've as good as blocked it in. Again, I might leave these beads of, oh, go on, I'll tidy it up a little bit. So I got to this point with it. Now, of course, I can come back in, different brush. This is a number 7. And now I can go back to the ultramarine and do some tweaking with it. Oh, I'll put the handle in. There we go. Now I'm going, yes, you can work by putting another color on top as I'm doing now. In this instance, ultramarine blue. So the rule is that you work from light to dark. And you can see how instinctive I'm being here. So I'm not being careful and paint to the line. That can be quite boring. And you just build up your confidence to paint as I'm doing here. There we go. And you see the paint it's flooding quite nicely there. I don't need to tease it. I can do if I wanted to. So I'm keeping this exercise very simple. Then I come back over to here, darken up there. Okay. So you can see, because the gravity is playing a role there, it's allowing the paint to, but just to demonstrate, I could tilt that paper, there we go, and get it to run back in on itself. And once again, once it comes to a dry area, it will stop. That is how you apply watercolor. As you can see here, the least brushing, the better. But it sounds simple, and yet it's very difficult to put into practice because we're so used to rebrushing. We can get away with it in acrylics and oils, but not so much with watercolor. Right, what I can do in a few moments is now put in a shadow, and for that I'll use the ultramarine and the alizarin for the violet. You can see this paint here. Now I could, if I wanted to, mop that up, and I could take the hairdryer to the painting and dry it off. But sometimes you want the two colours to merge together. You do lose quite a bit of control, but over a period of time, you would learn to gain more control over this next situation. There we go. And here is the shadow. See, the two colours will run into each other. And that can be that can be lovely in watercolour. And you will get used to it. And I can do the same here for the saucer. And once again, I'm quite happy for the two colours to bleed and run together. Yeah. So I don't need to take this much further than what I'm doing here. This is a very, very basic approach to watercolour. It's paramount. It's very, very important that you understand this rule, if you want to call it a rule. And as you know, I'm tilting it back a little bit now to allow it to run back on itself. And I can do some further tweaking by taking a smaller brush, and just add a few more stronger details to add a bit more interest. So for example, and as you can see, the paint is still quite wet, so it will flood into there we go, which I'm quite happy for it to happen. Oh, of course, the spout. Then I come back, I'll go darker in the shadow in the cup, pick out the handle a bit more, and give the cup to the saucer. You see, and that is flooding. And I'm going to bring this to a conclusion in a few moments. And once again, it's flooding there. And don't get too carried away with it. But as you can see, my brush is just going where the instinct takes me. I'll go a bit stronger there. And what I could do, of course, to make it, is go straight to what we call the pan, the colour itself. That's be the strongest colour. And a little flick of pink there. And maybe a little bit of a cast shadow of the saucer. And really, I can leave it at that. And as you can see, the colours are running together. So this is the purpose of this exercise, is this basic application of applying paint. With watercolour, as you can see in this demonstration, you can work quite quickly as well. Because of course, as I keep repeating, you cannot go back and do a lot of rebrushing. So I've just come off that. So there we go. Do try this yourself. The intention is that if you feel you'd like to do more watercolour, I will run perhaps more Zoom classes. As you know, I'm also planning more Saturday workshop, watercolour work. So I'm going to end it here. And what I've just done in the last few seconds is I put a mount around the painting, which is always good practice. Putting a mount around it transforms it. So I'll leave it at that, and I just return back to the finished painting with the mount around. Here we go. So in actual fact, this has probably taken me no longer than 4 or 5 minutes. So good practice again is when you're learning watercolor, don't spend an hour on doing something as simple as the quicker you can do it, the better the result, the more spontaneous it will look, as in my example here. So something as simple as subject is it. Do it a couple of times, but time limit yourself. No more than say 10 minutes on the first exercise, and then do it a second time, and then perhaps 7 minutes, and finally a third time, perhaps no more than 5 minutes. Happy painting.